I have to invite Professor Spύρος Γαλατσίδας of Δημοκρίτειο University of Thrace to give a speech about the origin of black pine, Pinus nigra of Mount Athos. Welcome, Mr. Galatzidis.
Thank you. I would like to express my thanks to the organizing committee for the invitation and for the opportunity that gives us to present our work in Mount Athos. I'm Σπύρος Γαλατσίδας, Professor of Forest Management at the Department of Forestry from Δημοκρίτειο University of Thrace, and my colleague Aristotelis Papageorgiou is Professor of Forest Genetics at the Department of Molecular Biology and Genetics from the same university. I will present a work which is part of a frame of a project that has been presented in more details by Nikos, the Strategic Environmental Management of Mount Athos under Climate Change, the live stemma Athos. You can find more details in the website of the project. Δημοκρίτειο University of Thrace supports the scientific part of this project. So I will present a more scientific subject today, the origin of black pine in Mount Athos. The structure of my presentation is in this slide. I will start with the description of the species, the basic characteristics of the tree of black pine, its geographical distribution, and of course, the unique characteristics that made this species important to be characterized as a priority habitat in the Natura 2000 network of Europe. I will go on with the specific characteristics of the habitat in Mount Athos, and I will present the management priorities for this habitat, and the core of my presentation will be the answer to the question, which is the origin of this species, the genetic survey we have conducted to find out the genetic structure of the species and the measure and assessment of its diversity in Mount Athos. And I will close my presentation with management recommendations to support the preservation of this habitat in Mount Athos. So starting with the species, black pine is a large tree reaching a height of more than 30 meters and a diameter of more than 1 meter. Its crown is typical conifer crown, conical in the young age or oval conical, and in the older ages the tree develops a flat top, which is ideal. You can see the flat top tree in the right picture of the slide. It's ideal for the nesting of bird species, raptor species, very preferred by the raptor species in Dadia forest, in the national forest of Dadia. The bark is also typical coniferous bark, relatively thick, rough, and the color is gray or brown. The needles are developed in couples, in pairs, of medium size, smaller than the other pine trees of the lower, the coastal zone, 1 to 2 centimeters long. The cones are also smaller, 5 to 10 centimeters long, oval, and ripen in the second year after pollination. That is, they produce the seeds, mature seeds, 2 years after the pollination of the tree. Coming to the geographic distribution of the species, black pine has a wide range of distribution, as you can see in the map. It covers almost all countries of the northern part of Mediterranean Sea, starting from Spain and reaching up to the Black Sea. It occurs mainly in mountainous and submountainous areas. In Greece, it covers the mainland Greece mainly in compact forests, but it is also found in the major islands of the Aegean, such as Evia, Lesbos, Samos, and Thassos, at elevations from 400 meters up to 2,000 meters. In Thrace, in Evros, we have found it in lower altitudes of 100 meters, but in Mount Athos, we have found the species at the sea level. It is one of the most important wood-producing species in Greece and covers large areas, mainly in the mainland Greece, as we have said, constructing pure stands and also, in lesser extent, mixed stands with beech and fir. The biological demands of the species, it's a shade-tolerant species which can grow in dry and arid stations regardless of the subsoil of the rock, and has a characteristic adaptability to soils with high metal concentration. These are the characteristics that made it important species to be classified as a priority habitat and is protected according to the European Directive 92/43 under the name Priority Habitat of Sub-Mediterranean Pine Forests with endemic black pines, and the number of the habitats is 9530. In Mount Athos, the black pine occurs scattered in the central part of the peninsula along the ridge of Mount Athos. It is found usually either as dispersed individual trees or in pure and mixed clusters or group of trees. The main characteristic of the population is that the population is small, fragmented, and isolated. These characteristics give us the management priorities for the conservation of this habitat. In order to define the major priorities, we have to examine the risks, the threats that threaten the species, and these threats include genetic erosion, loss of genetic diversity, that is, vulnerability to unpredictable events, mainly forest fires, and the lack of economic interest because the species produces wood that is not used for any purpose in Mount Athos, and that makes it a lower priority than chestnut we have seen previously by Nikos, or also holm oak. Therefore, the management actions for the conservation of the habitat is to provide, to assure the regeneration through treatments assisting the establishment of seedlings and the spread of the species in areas where it demonstrates sporadic occurrence. In order to be more specific on the measures that should be taken for the appropriate management of this habitat, we conducted a survey, a genetic survey, in order to assess the diversity of the species and the genetic structure of the species. And the first question that we have to reply in this survey was, what is the origin of the black pine in Mount Athos? Because we have heard a lot of stories from different monasteries that suggest that black pine is not natural, but it was introduced in Mount Athos, either from the last Tsar of Russia, although this species is not of any importance in Russia, or from a king of Greece in the 20th century that visited Mount Athos and brought together some trees. There are different stories. We had the feeling that it's a natural population and we wanted to test it. So the first question to answer was, what is the origin of the species? And then to define how different, if the population is different from neighboring populations of the black pine in the area, to see if the genetic diversity is enough to support a viable population there. It's very important for the maintenance of the habitat. To define any indicators of genetic erosion, and finally to make more precise measures for the maintenance, the appropriate management and the maintenance of this habitat in Mount Athos. So the methodology we have followed, we implemented the sampling of the trees. We collected needles of the trees across the occurrences of black pine in Mount Athos. The points you see in the first map are the locations of the trees we have sampled. Meanwhile, we have found places, also places where the species is present, and we have now a detailed map of its presence that can update the Natura 2000 habitat maps. And we have also collected samples from the nearby peninsula of Sithonia. You can see the second map. And the Laboratory of Forest Genetics had already collected samples from Thasos and Perama in the south part of Evros prefecture. The colleagues from the Forest Genetics Department have made the laboratory work. They extracted DNA from the samples and they identified 7 polymorphic sites of nuclear DNA, which are responsible, they are the measures, let's say, of the biodiversity of the species. And they performed a lot of statistical analysis, multivariate statistical analysis to define the structure of the DNA, of the genotype of the species, measure the diversity, and also define differentiation in the space, the different locations of the species in Mount Athos. The results, the first results are presented in this table. We can see that the genetic diversity was low in all populations, not only in the population, the subpopulations of Mount Athos, but also in the other populations of Sithonia, Thasos and Thrace. And also all populations demonstrated a heterozygote deficit and increased inbreeding rate. We can see the results better in this diagram. we can see that all populations lay together in the left part of the graph. Each point is a tree we have sampled, and the colors correspond to different populations or subpopulations. We can see that almost all populations are concentrated in the left part of the graph. Only the smaller population of the center has some distance from the other ones. And Perama is distinct from the others. It has a relatively long distance from the others because it is more isolated. And we knew from other studies that this is a center of a certain ecotype with genetic peculiarities. Although we see that the genetic structure is similar, if we see the same graph with only the subpopulations of the Mount Athos, we see that there are differences. Two populations are closer than the other two, which are more distinct, are clearly separated in this graph. So the populations are not genetically uniform. There is diversity in the structure of the genetic structure of the populations in Mount Athos. We can see the geographic distribution of the genetic structure. The colors in the upper graph correspond to similar genetic structure. So we have green colors in the upper left side, the northern and western part of Mount Athos. We have different genetic structure in the southern and eastern part, the green color, the yellow color. And in the medium, we have something intermediate. And some trees are also greatly different to the others in the middle of the population as well. This structure is a clear indication that although we have differentiation among different sites, we have a common substrate. There is a great part of global component of genetic structure, as our colleagues have characterized it. Global in the globality of Mount Athos. Okay. For the populations of Mount Athos, we have a common shared substrate of diversity, and we have another part that differentiates these populations. The common part suggests that the populations are of natural origin. So we have answered our first question, and therefore the final conclusions of our research is that we have indication of low genetic diversity and increased inbreeding in Mount Athos populations. We have also increased the risk of genetic erosion and population loss. There is a clear differentiation pattern among subpopulations of Mount Athos, confirming genetic fragmentation. Patterns of diversity and differentiation suggest that the population has a natural origin, and the fragmentation is a result of an initially larger population and several subsequent founder effects due to the ability of the species to colonize degraded areas, as we have seen in the characteristics of the species. And the management recommendations as a result of these outcomes of the survey. We suggest in situ management for the preservation of patches and small populations of black pine. That is, silvicultural measures to favor the the natural regeneration of the species the establishment of natural regeneration. And this will also raise the potential for carbon sequestration. And if we couple it with the fact that this species is a large tree and is not used, is not harvested in Mount Athos, we create in this way a carbon pool of wood, of Pinus black pine wood, that will last for decades. And the restoration activities, we call for seed collection and growing of seedlings of local origin from the trees within the Mount Athos, and planting these seeds and creating seedlings in nurseries in Mount Athos and use them for artificial regeneration, planting of trees in selected areas to increase the population density where we have very low or sporadic occurrences. The last measure we propose is to enrich the genetic diversity of the species by introducing other black pine provenances, planting of trees from the northern Greece, from varieties near with characteristics close to the characteristics of Mount Athos, and we suggest to plant it in small numbers and in small scale in certain places away from the natural occurrence of the species, away from the sites we have found the species in Mount Athos, in order to enrich the genetic diversity, because we have seen that genetic erosion is present in the natural populations of Mount Athos, of the black pine. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Galatsidas. And I want to ask the audience if there is a question for the professor.
What are the consequences of inbreeding? Are they similar to the consequences in the
Genetic erosion is the consequences of inbreeding.
What is
Genetic erosion is the consequence of inbreeding, because we have a small number of trees that exchange genes, and we lose the diversity. We have cross breeding from small number of trees. That's why we want to enhance the biodiversity. No. The genetic erosion has nothing to do with the health of the trees. They are robust trees. Black pine can expand in very difficult areas where no other tree goes. That's why it is expanding. We have found it unexpectedly in a lot of places in Mount Athos, outside of the already mapped habitat in the official maps of Natura 2000.
Thank you very much. I think it's the end of session 1. We will have, we'll have a coffee break, 15 minutes.